So in this video, I'm going to go over 4 tips that I've learned over the years when it comes to training for and running a half marathon. Now, I've run quite a few half marathons in my life. My first one I ran back in November 2015. I didn't train, and I don't even remember my time. It was the Savannah Rock and Roll Half Marathon in November 2015. I think my time was like 2 hours, 38 minutes, but again, I had literally no training. I just ran it. It was a horrible experience. I kept stopping and walking all throughout the race, and it was just a bad experience overall. But regardless, I didn't train, so I can't really be too upset with that. Then a few years later, in October of 2021, I ran the first half marathon that I actually trained for. I'd only really been into running at that point, like consistently for a year. I started in the summer of 2020, so October of 2021 had been a little bit over a year, and I did train for that one. My goal for that one was just to break 2 hours. Like I said, I was still fairly new to running, and I just wanted to kind of do something that I thought was somewhat, impressive, and I ran 1 hour 52 minutes. Then after that, I didn't run a half marathon again for another year, and that time I took a lot of time off. Actually, I ran an hour 34 minutes, and then the half marathon after that, I ran 1 hour 27 minutes, and then I ran 1 hour 23 minutes, and then I ran 1 hour 18 minutes twice, and I am now currently training to run 1 hour 15 minutes. So over the years, I have definitely taken a lot of time off my half marathon time. My first one I don't fully count because I didn't really train for it, so I'm not going to say that my first, half marathon was 2:38, even though I think it was around 2:38. The first one that I ran that I trained for was 1 hour 52 minutes, and my best was 1 hour 18 minutes and 6 seconds. And like I said, I'm currently in the beginning of a training block to run hopefully 1 hour 15 minutes in the half marathon. It's absolutely my favorite distance. I don't know what it is about that 21.1K or 13.1 miles. It just, for me, it feels perfect. It's just like right over that hour mark for me, and I just feel like I can run it fast, but it doesn't feel, especially right now, it used to feel like this. It doesn't feel like a distance that's too crazy far, and the training for it just feels like the most enjoyable for me. But yeah, with all that being said, the half marathon is my favorite distance. I've had the most fun with it over the years, and now in my long run, every week I typically run the distance of a half marathon around 21K or 13 miles, just because I find it to be just that perfect distance around for me right now. It takes me, somewhere between an hour and a half to two hours plus to run the distance based on the effort that I'm doing, and I just feel like it's just my favorite overall distance. But yeah, with all that being said, in this video, I'll talk about 4 tips that I've done over the years that I learned kind of unexpectedly. I feel like with running, you can't plan what you're going to learn. It just kind of happens. You have these moments that you just kind of figure stuff out, and nobody can really teach you them exactly, but hopefully I'll give you some tips and you'll be able to come to these realizations yourself. So the first and the most obvious tip is something that is probably the most annoying, and that is just patience and consistency. I know you hear it so much, and I'm going to continue to be the one to say it, because for the first 2 years of running, I never thought in a million years I could run a sub hour 20 half marathon, or a sub 3 hour marathon, which I've done as well. I never thought these times were possible, and through 3 years of just being consistent, all of a sudden I was just kind of able to slowly chip away and get to these times. And you really can't believe how much you kind of improve just through consistency and patience. Like, just run a lot of easy miles, a lot of easy kilometers, slowly increase the volume, and then kind of pull back a little bit and kind of, build like a roller coaster up and down. And every time you go up again, you go up a little bit more. Every time you kind of come down, just, come down a little bit less. And I say that because it is pretty important to let the body heal. You don't want to just be like continuously building. You want to kind of build and kind of gradually kind of get faster, or gradually kind of add volume, kind of like a classic chart where it goes up and you kind of have moments where you're dipping, but you have to also treat volume like that, and just believe that after years of doing it, you eventually will just get faster. It's just what's going to happen. To truly just run a half marathon and complete a half marathon, it's just going to take consistency and time to be able to eventually complete the distance. And slowly over time, of just consistently chipping away, you will be able to do it, as impossible as it might seem. You just have to keep grinding it out, and eventually the distance won't seem as challenging. The next tip I'd say would be, if you really want to complete and run one, you have to plan it out a little bit more. I'm not one to say you have to go insane with this, but I do believe you have to have some form of planning. So for example, really what I would recommend on the most basic level is find a race that you want to do, and then roughly look about 12 to 16 weeks out. I'd say if it's one of your first half marathons, don't go 16 weeks, go about 12 to 10 weeks, and that's going to be the training block. What you want to do in that time is obviously train. You want to slowly build your volume, have the peak volume, which will roughly be 5 to 6 weeks, and then a taper up. Typically what I do for a half marathon is a 12-week training block. I have 4 weeks to build to my goal peak distance, my peak volume. And then I run that volume for 6 weeks roughly, and then I taper up for about 2 to 3 weeks, and that gives me that roughly 12-week time frame. With that being said, I don't believe you have to plan the schedule like insanely detailed. I don't think you have to follow a schedule super planned. I think overall, when you're especially coming into running and learning it, Really just focus on improving from last week. Look at the volume you ran and just try to add a little bit more here and there. With that gets me to my next tip number 3, which is don't worry about speed. Don't worry too much about speed right away. It's definitely not going to be that important. And if you just consistently run in zone 2, you're just going to get faster. As the training block progresses, then of course start introducing some speed. My recommendation, and I did this early on and it worked really well, was for the first half of the training block, don't even think about speed. Just think about volume, consistency, and just building the mileage. Once you kind of hit that middle of the peak week, say you're peaking for 6 weeks at 100K, that'd be roughly what I'm doing now, but let's just say you have that 6-week peak at about 100K. On that 3rd week of the 100K, that's when you can really start to pound in some speed. That doesn't mean early on you can't do some tempo work and just overall like turning the legs over, but really start to then focus on hitting your goal pace. That obviously then gets me to have a realistic goal. If the goal is just to complete the race, then I would honestly recommend not even worrying about pace. Just worry about building the mileage, getting the distance down. If you have a set time, then obviously you want to start knowing what it feels like to run the paces. But initially, do not worry about it, especially in the first half of the training block. Do not worry about it. Just worry about being consistent and just getting the mileage down. And finally, the 4th tip, which is something that I've learned through a lot of trial and error and failure, is not to overthink it. Whenever I overthink a race, I typically don't run too well. And whenever I underthink a race, I typically don't run too well. I think the balance is somewhere in the middle to realize that you've put down the work, and with the work that you've hopefully put into, you're going to have a good result. But if you don't, it's not going to define you and you can just do it again. I think it's really important to remember that running should be fun. I think for me especially, that's kind of the point. I enjoy the training probably more than the race itself. So maybe I'm unique in that sense, but I'm one to enjoy the process more than the actual kind of finished product. That's just who I am. And when it comes to race day, when it comes to that race, you want to prepare in the sense of eating right, drinking right, and just being properly fueled and prepared through the training. But also don't overthink it too much. Don't put too much pressure on yourself on the start line, because ultimately it's not going to be what defines you. And on the other hand, which I've done many times too, where I try to think, let me just not overthink it at all. And you end up not eating enough the day before, not drinking water in the morning, or switching something up a few days out. And I've had probably even worse results with that. So you really want to be in that balance of not overthinking it too much, but not underthinking it. Just accepting what's going to happen is what's going to happen. Trust that what you've done is going to get you the goal that you want, and if it doesn't, just go for it again. So yeah, with all that being said, those are the 4 tips that I've learned over the years on being able to train for and complete a half marathon. First one is just patience and consistency. Second one is to plan not only the race that you're going to do, but also a little bit of the training block. Third one is not to force the speed, just rely on volume and not speed, and just trust that that will get you in the shape that you need to get into. And the 4th one is just don't overthink it, but also don't underthink it. Try to be right in that balance of having fun and enjoying the process. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and check out my channel. Like I said, I'm currently training to run a 1-hour, 15-minute half marathon. I'm gonna finish this video here because it's freezing outside. Thank you for watching.